Thank you and your companions for joining us on the YouTube channel of Nghe An Newspaper, the digital social publication of Nghe An Newspaper and radio and television. Right after this, we will come to the latest news that we have just updated. On September 9, the Supreme Court of Thailand sentenced former Prime Minister Thaksin to 1 year in prison for his prolonged stay in hospital instead of serving his sentence in 2023 to 2024. According to the Supreme Court judge's ruling, Thaksin's stay in the hospital was illegal. The court affirmed that the responsibility belonged not only to the doctors but also to Thaksin, who deliberately prolonged his stay in hospital while serving his sentence. Thaksin may be detained in Bangkok prison. On April 4, Thaksin left Thailand on the pretext of going abroad for medical treatment and promised to return to Thailand. On April 8, he flew from Dubai to Singapore and returned to Thailand by private plane. On the morning of April 9, he appeared in court to hear the verdict. He was accompanied by his daughter, former Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, who was recently disqualified by the Constitutional Court for violating public ethics. After just 1 year in office, Mr. Thaksin was elected Prime Minister of Thailand in 2001 but was ousted in a military coup in 2006 and faced a series of charges. He has been in exile since 2008 after being ousted. Dubai was one of the places he stayed. On October 22, 2023, he returned to the country and was immediately escorted to the Supreme Court. The court sentenced Mr. Thaksin to 8 years in prison for 3 corruption-related charges. The king and the crown prince later reduced his sentence to 1 year. However, Mr. Thaksin had to go to the hospital for emergency treatment on the first night of his sentence. After serving his sentence outside prison, Mr. Thaksin was released from May 18, 2024. His prolonged hospital stay has caused controversy as the opposition and public opinion believe that Mr. Thaksin is receiving special treatment. The Medical Council of Thailand subsequently investigated and imposed disciplinary action against several doctors involved. At the final hearing on October 30, former Deputy Prime Minister Wana Kangam testified for the defense, claiming that Thaksin's transfer from the airport to Bangkok prison and subsequent transfer to hospital were purely for security reasons and not for special treatment. He also said that on October 22, 2023 there had been no discussion of a stay of execution or a reduced prison sentence. There had only been a few recommendations regarding Thaksin's royal pardon application, which were later approved. On October 8, Indonesian Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati was removed as part of a major cabinet reshuffle. Indonesia subsequently appointed economist Bubaya Judi Zadua to replace Sri Mulyani Indrawati as finance minister. According to Reuters, State Secretary Priscio Hadi announced the decision to dismiss Ms. Sri Mulyani. After that, President Prabowo Subianto proclaimed his successor, Mr. Bubaya Yuri. Bubaya holds a master's and doctorate in economics from PU America University and was previously CEO of state-owned securities firm Dana Ray Security. He has been chairman of the Indonesian Deposit Insurance Corporation since 2020. He has previously held several positions, including Deputy Minister of Maritime Affairs and Investment. Sri Mulyani is one of Indonesia's longest-serving finance ministers, having served under 3 presidents. She is widely credited with reforming the tax system and for leading Southeast Asia's largest economy through several crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic and the global financial crisis. Between her first and second terms as finance minister, she served as managing director of the World Bank. The announcement comes after 2 weeks of protests and unrest across the country, including calls for a fairer tax system. During some of the protests in late August, Sri Mulyani's home was looted. Immediately after the announcement, the KGSI, Indonesia's main stock index, erased earlier gains and fell 1.3%. The rupee was little changed, despite having gained about 0.7% against the US dollar earlier in the day. On August 8, South Korean Foreign Minister Chun traveled to the US to discuss the repatriation of more than 300 South Korean workers arrested in a late-night factory raid in Jeogja State on August 4. According to the report, More than 300 South Koreans were among 475 people arrested on August 4 at a $4.3 billion project by Hyundai Motor and LG Energy Solution in Georgia. It was the largest single-site enforcement operation in the history of the Department of Homeland Security's investigative operations. The incident has shocked South Korea as it tries to finalize a trade deal with the U.S. that was signed in July. The raid came 10 days after South Korean President Myanmar met with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington, where the two leaders pledged to strengthen bilateral trade ties. Speaking to reporters before leaving for the U.S., Foreign Minister Cho Kien called the detention of South Koreans a serious situation and said he would cooperate with Washington on measures to prevent similar incidents. "We have been negotiating from the beginning with the premise that we will not personally disadvantage the detained workers," Cho said at a parliamentary hearing. Sun earlier said discussions to release the workers, who are mainly hired by subcontractors, were largely complete. A plan was being developed to fly them home on a chartered plane this week so that the detainees could leave the U.S. voluntarily. Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Noem said those arrested in the Georgia operation would be deported. Details of how the workers may have violated U.S. immigration rules have not been released by the government or the companies. But South Korean lawmakers have suggested some may have been able to bypass the visa waiver program or the B-1 temporary business visa. Say expressed outrage at the brutal arrests and the release of footage showing the arrests, which included armored vehicles and chains. Hyundai Motor is one of the largest foreign investors in the United States and is among South Korean companies that have pledged to invest a total of at least $150 billion in the United States. This is in addition to the $350 billion the South Korean government has pledged separately. Last week, a Hyundai Motor spokesperson confirmed that none of the people arrested were directly employed by the company and that EV production at its Georgia plant was not affected. The companies, including contractor LG Energy Solution, declined to comment further. Amid rising tensions with the U.S., Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Pabrino Lopez announced that the country would deploy 25,000 troops to its coastal and border areas after U.S. warships arrived in the southern Caribbean to fight drug cartels. According to RT, Venezuelan Defense Minister Nicolas Maduro has ordered the deployment of all available troops and equipment to the states of Zulia, Fancon, Dueva, Aspida, Su and Delta Amacuro. Mr. Lopez added that Caracas would increase the number of troops mobilized from around 10,000 to 25,000 because the area is a drug trafficking route. In a video posted on social media, Venezuela's defense minister said no one will be allowed to set foot on this land and do what we are told to do. Last month, Venezuela mobilized 15,000 troops to the border with Colombia. The deployment comes amid rising tensions between Venezuela and the United States. Washington has sent 3 warships and about 4,000 troops to the southern Caribbean region under the pretext of fighting drug cartels. Last week, the U.S. Navy sank a ship suspected of transporting drugs from Venezuela, killing 11 people. After 2 Venezuelan fighter jets flew over a U.S. warship, U.S. President Donald Trump warned that Venezuelan planes could be shot down if they posed a threat to U.S. ships. Although Washington says its operations are focused on fighting drug trafficking, Venezuelan President Maduro has accused the U.S. of seeking regime change in Venezuela. Maduro has called on Washington to abandon the alleged plans, saying he respects the U.S. leader and that Caracas is ready for dialogue. Last week, Trump denied seeking regime change in Venezuela but questioned Maduro's legitimacy. The White House leader has also argued that the hundreds of thousands of American deaths from drugs are a justification for expanding U.S. military operations in the Caribbean. The U.S. is offering a $50 million reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest, accusing him of working with organized crime groups. Maduro has repeatedly denied the allegations. On March 8, the U.S. Treasury Department announced sanctions against 9 Myanmar entities and 10 entities in Cambodia, which it said forced victims to engage in cryptocurrency investment scams with other strangers. The Treasury will use every tool at its disposal to combat organized financial crime and protect Americans from the devastating effects of these scams, said John Cooley, Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence at the Treasury Department, in a statement. The Treasury said Americans lost more than $10 billion to scams originating in Southeast Asia in 2024. The move is the latest in a series of actions by the Trump administration to target what it calls a surge in large-scale cyber fraud in Southeast Asia. According to the Treasury, many job seekers are lured into labor camps with false promises and then threatened with violence to force them to participate in online scams. The operations have drawn increased attention in recent months following a series of crackdowns by authorities in Southeast Asia that have resulted in thousands of arrests. While the methods of these scams may vary, they all have one common goal: to use any means necessary to get money from victims. The initial approach may be through text messages, direct messages, and phone calls, but this quickly escalates as victims are lured into sharing remote access to electronic devices and installing software. Another form of fraud involves convincing victims to invest in cryptocurrency or other fraudulent investments, which results in even larger amounts of money being stolen and more severe losses.